Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Vanessa Weaver, CEO of Alignment Strategies and President of DITV, Diversity and Inclusion Television. We are proud strategic partners of INROADS and have collaborated with them to bring you today's Disruptive Innovation Diversity Summit. Today, my job is to move this virtual event from session to session. So get ready for an incredible and highly interactive experience. You are in for a treat. Please know that there will be several opportunities to take breaks in between sessions so you can give the program your full attention. Now, I want to introduce you to Forrest Harper, President and CEO of INROADS. He's going to kick off today's program. Forrest is a remarkable and tireless leader, and because of him, we are here today learning to be disruptive. Here's Forrest.
Good morning and good day. Welcome to 50 Years of Impact and Transformation. That was a powerful video. For a half a century, INROADS has specialized in disruption. What do I mean by that? Well, when Elon Musk decided to enter the car manufacturing business, he did it in a way that challenges the norms and advanced the industry. When Father Carr, a founder, sought to prepare leaders to enter corporate America, he sought to do so in a way that would change corporations forever. As a result of that latter, we have Vasundha Duckett, CEO of Consumer Banking at JP Morgan Chase, the first Black woman CEO in the company's history. You see, the way Vasundha describes it, INROADS was a disruptor in her life. INROADS has Baron Witherspoon, Vice President, Global Industry Affairs and Corporate Race Initiatives. Baron really has been challenging the entire advertising industry, along with P&G, to represent people of color with dignity and respect. And by leading race matters at P&G, Baron is a disruptor. You see, the word disruption is controversial because it is challenging the norms, making people feel uncomfortable. But as leadership philosophy, it embodies what INROADS has had to be in order to achieve the milestones you see this very year. We've had to be disruptive. And in doing so, we stand today as the leading solutions provider for corporations and government agencies challenged with cultures of inequities. We are enduring times, and we know these enduring times because it affects our lives that are being disrupted on a daily basis, particularly with the global pandemic in front of us. You see, we are having traditions of injustice disrupted by the protest and call for injustice. Our classrooms are being disrupted by digital learning. Disruption is all around us. And for INROADS, this 50 years, we've been practicing for this moment. We are strong, we're determined, and we endure the difficulty. We are prepared to continue transforming lives. We're poised for a future of continued impact. You see, it was Shirley Chisholm who once said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. This approach to leadership has inspired the way our special guest leads. Connie Lindsey of Northern Trust is a true disruptor. As Northern Trust Head of Corporate Social Responsibility and Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, she is responsible for the design and implementation of the global social responsibility community. You see, Connie is an inspiration to a lot of people, particularly to include me. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome up Connie Lindsey.
Thank you, Forrest. It is a privilege and an honor to join the Disruption as a Form of Innovation Summit on behalf of INROADS with you today. As a proud INROADS alumna, I am just honored to be able to share my thoughts and ideas about what disruption really means at this point in time in our history. 50 years since the founding of INROADS, the implications, the impact that it has had on my life, and the expectation that it created in me as a leader to do more, to be more, and to serve more. Several decades ago, when I think about my introduction to INROADS in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a young Black girl, first generation college student in my family. I had no idea that this many years later, I'd be here with you because the narrative around what it meant to be a young Black girl from an underrepresented neighborhood in Milwaukee, well, the odds just weren't that great. But I am so grateful that there was a disruptor among us. And that disruptor was Frank Carr. Frank Carr, who had a vision and an idea that things could be better, that representation could be increased, that he could do more, that even as a disruptor of one, the seismographic effect that he's had on the lives of so many who have had the INROADS experience lives on today. A first generation college student who heard about a mission to develop and place talented, underserved youth in business and industry, and to prepare us for corporate and community leadership. What a radical idea at the time. Back in 1970, when Frank Carr had this disruptive idea, I'm certain that as he thought about the long-term implications of what he was doing, the sacrifices that he made to ensure that we would be here today were yet to be known. And so as we go about the summit, as each of you engage in the various panels and discussion as it relates to disruption, let us engage and think deeply about our part in it. What is the commitment and the sacrifice that we must continue to make? A question that I hear frequently based on where we are today, a global pandemic, political unrest, protest. The question that consistently comes is this a moment or a movement? Is this a moment or a movement? Well, social disruption is a term used in sociology to describe the alteration or the breakdown of social life, often in a community setting. So social disruption implies a transformation in which the old certainties of modern society are falling away and something quite new is emerging. I would submit that we are still in the midst of that transformation, that in spite or despite all of the headwinds of change, of turmoil, of protest, the disruption is necessary. And it begins, it starts, and it continues with us. I submit that this is both a movement and a moment for us to take the time to reflect on what diversity, equity, and inclusion really means. A moment for us to take the time to consider what transformation requires of each of us. A moment for us to be willing to make the necessary sacrifices, to use the intellectual rigor, the kind of energy that is required for us to continue to ensure that inclusion, which is a verb, actually has meaning. When I think of diversity, equity, and inclusion and the power of it to disrupt systems and structures, I look at it this way. Diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance, but equity means I get to pick the songs to which I dance. The courage that it takes for us as leaders to look at data, information, and the behavioral changes that need to exist in order for us to really activate that disruption that is required. And it is the power of INROADS and all of those who work with us, all of you who are leading organizations, the students who are a part of INROADS today, whose dreams, whose expectations, whose very lives have been so dramatically, and I would say abundantly and wonderfully disrupted by the concept of what you can do. I often said that during my INROADS experience, all of the teachers and educators and leaders and mentors and coaches wrote something on the tablet of my heart. What I learned from INROADS about giving back, lifting as we climb, that's all a part of what has led my career as a leader and my engagement as a civic leader in disrupting patterns that would exclude anyone in our society. And social responsibility, what that means for me is it really is the interconnection of society and business. How do we leverage the resources of organizations, institutions who have a duty to act in the best interests of the environment and society as a whole? Yes, Frank Carr was a disruptor. A disruptor is a way of thinking that produces that unconventional strategy, a way of thinking that turns expectations upside down and takes an industry or an organization into its next generation. 50 years ago, Frank Carr was ready to move into the next generation and the next generation. So all of you in the INROADS program now, going through the training, working in corporations, know that you are a part of a long generation of disruptors. Now, the way that I choose to disrupt might be different from yours. But when I think about what inclusion and equity means, a lot of the work that I do in my career at Northern Trust, we recently embarked on a refresh of our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. And it included several aspects. The two key aspects that we looked at were what were the implications or what were some of the hypotheses that we drew relative to representation in our organization, and how could we impact and influence those outcomes. We worked with our corporate board of directors, this process led by our chief executive officer, to whom I report, to really think about what were the levers we could pull to change, what was the quantitative and qualitative approach. Later on in the summit, you'll be looking at data and ways to leverage data to help move the needle. But it goes beyond just data. During the qualitative work that we did within our organization, we learned about the lived experiences of people of color and women within the organization. And we were courageous enough to ask ourselves those questions. Why are there differences in representation among those key groups? And what are we going to do about it? One hypothesis that we had was that movement was a direct correlation to success within the organization. And we looked at data. We looked at over 4,000 positions within our firm over 4 years. Who was getting the most movement? What were the implications of that? And we found that most of those moves were going to people who were not people of color. So we knew that that was a lever that we could use to help advance representation. And it's not just representation. We looked at our systems and structures and processes. What is it that we needed to do internally? How do we change behaviors, the neurology of bias and what that meant for us? And finally, how would we hold our leaders accountable? So we came away with that with 3 outcomes of our strategy: accountability, training and development, and culture. Accountability, we've often heard it said, what gets measured gets done. We created dashboards for our executives. They understand clearly what the data about representation in their specific business units are and what levers they can pull to help effectuate the kind of change in representation. Training and development. We knew that if we were to scale certain programs, we would be able to engage more individuals, people of color, and women. And finally, culture. Someone said that culture eats strategy for lunch. So we knew that if we didn't change the minds and the behaviors of individuals who are making these decisions, we would not get the outcomes that we were looking for. Maya Angelou said, if you're going to live, leave a legacy. Make a mark on the world that can't be erased. That is what disruptors do. That is what INROADS is. That is what brings us 50 years later, 50 years after the civil rights movement, to a place where some of the challenges, issues, and conversations seem to be consistent with what we talked about 50 years ago. But I want you to be encouraged and to know that the work we are doing and will continue to do is not in vain. The way that we address systemic and structural racism, the way that we disrupt decisions, policies, and practices that preclude inclusion in any aspect of our lives, and particularly in the areas in which we work and live, we are the disruptors. We are the ones who are going to be innovative in how we approach the challenges, that we will lay wide open the opportunities that exist for us to be those courageous leaders. Frank Carr definitely left a legacy 50 years ago. Protests are another form of disruption. Every person who's gone through the INROADS experience understands disruption. There was a disruption for me when I went through the process many years ago, because I had to learn to see myself as someone who could be a part of corporate structure, experiences that were new to me at the time. But it is within that disruptive process of inroads and leadership that I learned that I mattered, as I often heard from my Girl Scout troop leader, that I was not what was the matter, that I mattered. So because of that experience, I knew that I could do more, be more, expect more. We as a country and as a world are in a liminal season. We're stuck between an ending and a new beginning. I heard someone say, and I think it is so relevant now, that we must learn to honor the space between no longer and not yet. No longer and not yet. That space is the place where resilience, possibility, and opportunity are born. Our social responsibility of understanding that if innovation is to occur, we have to consider and challenge ourselves to think about what resilience looks like for individuals in underserved communities and areas. How do we bring resources to bear to address some of the societal issues that we face? How do we look at the systems and structures, both within our own organizations where we work, but also within society? How are we representing ourselves? Are we courageous enough as leaders to ask the question and question the answer? A USA Today analysis shows that while corporations and boardrooms have added African Americans and other people of color over the decades, the executive suites have not. Even as some companies have diverse boards, a common reality in America, more than 55 years after the civil rights movement, is that the representation still remains, leaves a lot to be desired. Of the 279 top executives listed at the 50 biggest companies in the S&P 100, 274 are white, Hispanic, or other ethnicity. 5 are Black. I think to date, probably 3 Black CEOs. Only 2% are Hispanic. Statistics from 2017 show that Hispanics make up 17% of the labor force. However, they occupy only 4.3% of executive positions in the US. So the structural changes that can reduce or eradicate systemic racism are altogether different from cultural changes, and yet both must happen simultaneously. They require the reallocation of basic resources to really move beyond and equalize and normalize this wealth gap, something that we have to address. The truth of all of this is necessary and must be faced. I often tell individuals as we are working through diversity, equity, and inclusion training that I'm very comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that is one of the basic tenets of doing this work. John F. Kennedy said, "The great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. Belief in myths allows the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought." As we seek to abolish the myths about people of color, about our ability and our capacity, and all of us collectively to make change, to disrupt things that don't honor the very basic dignity and humanity of each of us, then we have to consider that we are also disruptors and myth busters. What myths exist that preclude the progress that 50 years later we're still having this discussion about inclusion and equity? The disruption, the innovation that is required. For the progress that we've made, yes, I acknowledge and celebrate that. For the work to be done, I implore and inveigle you to stay the course, to stay strong. And in closing, as we consider disruption and what we must continue to do to create sustainable change, to honor the higher and the best parts of ourselves, who we are as leaders, who we are as members of our community, that together we are stronger, that what INROADS taught me so many decades ago about my requirement, my responsibility to give back. Someone said that it is so important for us to remember and to understand that the good deeds I do for others is the rent I pay for occupying space on the earth. And I want to make sure that I'm not writing blank checks. And so when we think about disruption, this summit, and the work that will be done today, and all from whom you will hear, let us think about this sustainable change and the indefatigable pursuit of inclusion, justice, and equity. In closing, I want to leave you with this thought that Frederick Douglass said in 1875, and I think it speaks to us so very clearly today. The whole history of the progress of human liberty shows that all concessions yet made to her august claims have been born of earnest struggle. The conflict has been exciting, agitating, all absorbing, and for the time being, putting all other tumults to silence. It must do this, or it does nothing. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. I congratulate you and join you as we work hard to create the kind of disruptive innovation that will lead to a path of success, of expanding the opportunities for all, of the courageous leadership in honor of the memory of the outstanding, unparalleled work of Frank Carr, our founder, that INROADS, building that path to the future while having the bridge for what was connect for what is to be, as we honor the space between no longer and not yet. Honor that space with disruption, with innovation, with courage, conviction, and commitment. Thank you all, and have a great summit.
Thank you, Connie, for your words of wisdom and strength.
At the heart of every great change is a great human. Come help us create value with businesses everywhere.
Culture disruption is all around us, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, as we will learn from Andrew Awe, a noted expert on transformation and workplace culture. Andrew is an INROADS alum, and today he is co-founder and president of the Intercept Group, North America.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I really wish we could have done this in person, but I look forward to connecting with many of you throughout the summit. INROADS has played a very important role in my life, and as I think about the accomplishments that I've had to date, many of them would not have been possible had I not joined the INROADS family. And this was such an integral launch pad for myself, and I owe a lot to INROADS. And I still remember Richard Pinnock, who was one of the regional leads at the time, and his intensity and his passion for bringing out the best in talent. And that just really resonated with me. That inspired me to do many of the things that I've done in my life. And today, what I get to do is I get to sit down with executives from around the world within the technology industry, the automotive industry, the retail industry, oil and gas, and sit down and really help to solve a fundamental question, which is, what's next? I would say now that question's evolved a little bit to essentially, what is now? The markets are changing by the week, and then how do we prepare for this new economy? And so 10 months ago, I was on a stage in Chicago in front of 2,000 manufacturing executives, and we were talking about digital transformation and what that means in terms of empowering their lean transformation journeys. And as we talked about what's next, who would have thought that in 10 months the world would have changed so drastically in such a short amount of time? And I think pre-COVID, what we saw is this fusion of our digital and our physical worlds. And that really is at the crux of what digital transformation is all about, right? And that is at the top of the agendas for many organizations. And I think that as many as any major industrial revolution, there's always an opportunity, and there's also always a threat. And the promise of it is that there's this huge economic opportunity that we all are pursuing, this $100 trillion economic opportunity. And on the flip side, it's highly disruptive. You've got, you look at any kind of performance markers or benchmarks like the Fortune 500 list, 52% of that list has changed in the past 20 years, which is absolutely incredible. So there's this incredible disruption that is also happening alongside this incredible opportunity. And so when I look back at what's happened in the past several months is that organizations have had to essentially digitally transform overnight. And I can't tell you how many organizations would say to me before, Andrew, there's no way that we could do remote. We cannot, it's got to be in person. And so now you've had, the shift towards remote work, where every organization has had to figure out how do you do remote productivity really well. And we're constantly on these kind of back-to-back video calls, which we're going to talk more about in a moment. But it's not just in our professional lives, it's also in our personal lives. You think about the return to the NBA and what a journey it's been. The virtual courtside seats are now powered by the same video conferencing technology that we're using, day to day. When you take that a step further in terms of where we're headed, 4 years ago, I talked about mixed reality and the promise of bringing holograms into the workplace and what that's going to do in terms of changing the way we collaborate. Well, that's what we're seeing this year. We're seeing the scale out of mixed reality where we are bringing holograms into our physical worlds so that we're going to be able to collaborate a heck of a lot more efficiently. And so let me give you an example. 6 weeks ago, what Mercedes has done is actually they're sending out these mixed reality headsets to 400 dealerships across the United States. And what this is going to allow them to do, their technicians, is connect with engineers back at headquarters and from around the world to be able to fix customer issues the first time. So they're going to be able to look under the hood with that technician, be able to annotate over areas where the technicians got to be able to fix certain components or help them diagnose certain issues. That, I think, is the future of where we go from here, and very much the reality, frankly, of today. So it's changing the way that we collaborate. I think another change that we're going to see is we're going to see more truly global organizations. I think the general acceptance from remote teams is going to allow us to really break down these geographic borders, help organizations find the best talent possible, regardless of where they are. And on the flip side, for knowledge workers, it's a great opportunity to be able to expand employment opportunities. So I think we're going to start to see truly global organizations. I think another form of fusion that we're seeing is the fusion between humans and machines. And we're seeing this new sort of cognitive division of labor. And I'll give you an example. Takata, which is a pharma company, back in May was recruiting for patients for a COVID-19 vaccination. And that process is very complex. If anyone who's part of healthcare is, you've got to be able to identify the right patients. You've got to collect a lot of very important information. There's a lot of privacy concerns. There's a lot of database work that goes into this. And so to find an eligible candidate and process them, that's a few weeks process for any candidate. And so what they've done is they've essentially recorded a lot of their administrative tasks of collecting patient information, transferring over into databases, copying and pasting where they need. And so using robotic process automation, or RPAs, they've been able to take a few weeks process and turn that into a few days, right? And so we're seeing, COVID really propel new forms of automation, and which we're going to continue to see going forward. And so, yes, there's been a ton of change. I think COVID has changed our world, but I would argue that it hasn't changed our path. I think we are already on this path. COVID just accelerated it. And you think about the nature of work and how it's been evolving over the past decade. I think in the past, what organizations were pursuing is the straightest path to efficiency, individual contributions in a perfect sequence. And now you think about your workflows, it is anything but linear. It is matrix, it's hyper collaborative, it's this active collision of ideas versus this very nice, neat individual contribution or sequence of inputs. And so I think as you think about, okay, well, what does that mean today? It's got a heck of a lot faster. It's not about how big the organization is anymore. It's about how fast the organization. And so agility really has become the new currency of business. And what have we seen in the past 10 months? We've seen organizations like Hertz, for example, a 100-year-old organization, which is filed for bankruptcy. Then you've seen an organization like Shopify, less than 20 years old, which has amassed over $120 billion in market cap. And so the point is that no organization today is too big to fail, but no organization or company is too small to disrupt. And so we need to figure out how we become more agile as an organization. And so part of that is, part of it is a technology strategy, but it is also heavily a people strategy. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And you think about, the demographics of the United States. Millennials are the single largest cohort in the workplace. They're the single largest living generation, and they're now at an age where they're actually not just big, but they're also influential, right? They're becoming, heads of lines of business. They're becoming head of households. So it's not just size, it's also power. And so here's the challenge of this math is that we study 3,000 millennials every single year, and we want to track, what does career aspirations look like? What kind of demands do they want to see in the workplace? What kind of technologies they're excited about? Some alarming statistics that we're coming across is that there's big disengagement, at work. And so this study is from this year, where we saw 73% of those employed are open to a new job opportunity. We're seeing 40% actively looking for another job. And so that is a problem. You got the single largest cohort in your workplace that's disengaged. And so that's what we're going to solve for today. When I talk about millennials, though, it's funny because I do get this sense when I say that word to some, this vision of apathy and being lazy and entitled does come to mind, whether it's said or not. And maybe some of you may have that perception right now. But let me work on changing that perception. And I want to tell you a story. A number of years ago, I was at a friend's house, and his son was there. He was about 17 at the time, and he's very passionate about technology, but he started talking to me about Bitcoin, right? And so he started to write articles about Bitcoin, and he would actually get paid 5 Bitcoin for every article that he wrote. And he didn't get rich off that, let me tell you, because it was trading on 80 cents on the dollar, right? So he was earning about $1.50, $2 an hour. And as a high school student, with not a whole lot of money, it wasn't as bad, and it could be worse, in his opinion. So he earns 20 Bitcoin, and he takes 8 Bitcoin, and he buys a T-shirt. Probably the world's most expensive T-shirt these days, but that's what he did, and that was very empowering to him. And he is a millennial, and the concept that we could create a financial system that doesn't depend on just a very few set of influential people or organizations. And so that is Vitalik Buterin. And so he went on to found the second largest cryptocurrency in the world, worth $40 billion market cap as of today. And I tell that story because Vitalik has 3 core characteristics that are inherent to the millennial generation, and it's our job as leaders to unlock that from our talent. The first thing is he's got a creator's mindset. He constantly is asking, why can't we do something in a new way, in a different way? And I'm sure you're hearing that from the millennial talent on your bench. The second thing is they're empowered by values. We're going to talk about that more in a minute. But the third thing is they demand transparency. If I think about what is the single defining moment of this generation, especially pre-COVID, I would say the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And what that taught millennials is that you can't trust institutions, right? And so they demand transparency from every interaction they have from their employers, but also from the companies that they buy from. So as employees as well as customers, they demand transparency. I don't think it was any coincidence that you got the Lehman Brothers that go down September 15th, and then 6 weeks later, you have the mysterious Bitcoin white paper that surfaces on the net. These are interlinked events. And so I tell that story because, Vitalik and the generation itself has a very strong creators and owners mindset. And so when we ask millennials, what's the future career aspiration? What do you want to be, or what do you want to achieve at the end of your career? And they are 3 times more likely to want to be their own boss or to be a business owner than to be, a corporate executive with the corner office. And so that, I think, is scary to some, but I believe that there's actually a lot of power in that, because we need an owner's mindset in our organizations. And in fact, as a firm, we actually look for those that have a side hustle, because that to us says to us that they do have an owner's mindset. They know what it is to think like a business owner. And so when I sit down with different organizations across a number of industries, the organizations that are the highest growth, that are the most innovative, in my opinion, have the highest density of employees that have an owner's mindset. And so let's unpack that for a moment. Let me tell you a story or help you articulate what is the impact of an owner's mindset. Let's go back to the early 2000s, where some of the brightest minds in America were trying to solve a fundamental problem, and that was, how do we connect an internet search user with a contextual ad? And so at the time, Overture was the leader, and so GoTo was their search engine, and so they IPO'd at $1 billion valuation. So the market placed $1 billion bet on them. And at the same time, you had this small company called Google. And for those Googlers on the call, you will recognize this story. And so what a lot of people don't know, we all know how the story ends, but a lot of people don't know some of the single moments that helped change the trajectory for Google. And one of them was on May 24th, 2002. And at that time, that race wasn't going very well against Overture. They were doing about $6 million in profit. Google was. Overture was doing a couple $100 million in profit. And so very big disparity. And so on May 24, 2002, Larry Page had put these 3 words, pinned these 3 words on a sticky note in the kitchen at Google headquarters. And he was talking about Google's AdWords engine. And so there were a number of examples where, you know, consumers would search for, let's say, a Kawasaki H1B motorcycle, and they would get advertisements for law firms talking about an H1B foreign visa application. So it didn't understand the context that well. And so he posted a number of those examples. He put that in the kitchen on a Friday. And so Jeff Dean was one of the last people to leave Google on Friday. And so in the afternoon, he went into the kitchen, made a cappuccino, and he saw this Post-it note, and he saw the number of examples. He flipped through it, and he said, well, he actually encountered something very similar on the search side of the business, on the other side of the business. And without saying anything to anybody, he goes back to his desk, and he starts trying to solve the problem, which sounds non-intuitive because you got a stack of work on your desk, and yet you're solving a problem that you're essentially not necessarily going to get credit for. That's not part of your scope. That's not in your swim lane, but you're solving it anyway. And so he spends a few hours on it on Friday. He comes back in on Saturday for a couple more hours. And then on Sunday night, he puts his kids to bed at around 9 o'clock. He works through the night. And then early in the morning, he sends through a fix. And he says, I think I got it. And so Google went that year from doing $6 million in profit to $99 million in profit. And because they were able to improve the accuracy of the algorithm based on Jeff Dean's fix. And so I use that story because I think it's an important one of understanding what is the impact of an owner's mindset. And so we need to figure out ways of how we unlock that within the millennials on our team who are highly entrepreneurial. And so this is what's called the millennial hierarchy of needs. And so obviously inspired by Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it's different in that Maslow says we go from the bottom up. We think about physical, we go all the way up to self-actualization. For millennials, it's the other way around. You need to start at the top. You need to start at values. And so here's the thing, we're going to go through this one by one. Here's the thing about values is that just because you say you have values or you know what your values, you know what your value, you know what you want your values to be, it doesn't mean you have values. It means you have intention to create values. Values are created by the curation of all the experiences that you deliver on your team, the way you conduct your meetings, the way you do your check-ins, the way you do your meetups, the way you do your performance evaluations. That's experiences. Okay, so those experiences in total create the values that drive the behaviors, and these behaviors is what drives the outcomes. And so when we ask millennials, what is the number one reason why there's discontentment in the workforce or in your particular job, it's this perceived disconnection between their values and that of their organizations. And so when we ask them, okay, well, what values do you really care about? Do you demand from your organization? Not desire, but what do you demand? Inclusion and diversity is among the top 5 every single year. Okay, and so what I want to do is I want to challenge us all to think about, well, yeah, I think we all say diversity is important to our organizations, but what kind of experiences do you deliver on your team that actually create or reinforce that value of diversity? And so one of our global technology clients, what we do is we do culture exploration days. And these days is really intended to actually explore the different religions, the different traditions, the different food of all these different cultures. And what we do is we actually have different people in the organization lead these so they're able to explain to their counterparts and their colleagues to explain about their cultures and their traditions. That is what I mean by experiences. These experiences is what define the values of the organization, which is what drives the behaviors, which is what drives the outcomes. Second pillar I want to talk about is betterment. And so betterment is something that is really ingrained in this generation. They constantly want to do better. And Business Insider actually did this really fascinating article on the very creative job titles that we've created in organizations to create the sense of artificial movement. All right, so one of the best ones, a time ninja. What the heck is a time ninja? Right? But these are the kinds of roles that we are creating in our organizations to create this sense of vertical movement. And betterment is about constant progression. Okay, and I think that one of the things that we can do to address this point is we need to fix the feedback loop. Because traditionally what's happening in organizations, still most organizations I sit down with, They're doing performance reviews every 6 months, right? And so every 6 months, what do you focus on? It's the long-term strategic stuff. It's not about the day-to-day things that happen. And here's the thing, morale and motivation, these are very fragile things, right? And so the dangers are not what happens, you know, they don't appear at these checkpoints, these 6-month checkpoints. They appear in between these 6 months checkpoints. That's the danger zone of where we're losing talent. And so we need to fix the feedback loop. And we need to make that a lot more frequent. And I want you to think about outside the workplace for a moment. You ride an Uber or you get Uber Eats as an example. What happens the moment that you finish that service or you complete that service, right? Or you receive that service? You're rating that driver. You're rating that person, and they're also rating you. That feedback is instant. But when we go to work, we got to wait 6 months to get feedback on how we did and talk about how we can get better. That's why I'm very, very excited about tools like Hey Taco as an example. Hey Taco, which it sounds a little crazy, but let me explain it. Hey Taco, what it does is every person in the organization gets 3 tacos a day that they can send to their counterparts and their teammates. And you send a taco because you're acknowledging behavior that's in line with the values of your organization. Okay, and so I love these platforms because they're essentially rewarding people for acting in the right ways. It's reinforcing values, and you start to get a sense for who's sending the most tacos, who's receiving the most tacos. And so that creates, when you celebrate, when you praise each other, what you're essentially doing is you're creating a foundation of trust. Right? So when you have these improvement conversations of how we get stuff done better as a team or as individuals as well, you're coming at it from a foundation of trust. That's extremely important. You know, as a firm, what we do to really foster that betterment is every full-time employee has a learning fund. And what we do is we mandate that learning fund is actually not related to the business. And let me tell you why. You know, our ethos is be better. And so to us, it's this quest of constant progression, constant learning. And if that is a true value, then to us, that shouldn't start the moment you step into the office or the moment you come online or the moment you start your work. That is a lifestyle value that we are trying to instate. And so that's why we say learn about art, learn about cooking, learn about dancing, whatever it is, learn a new skill and bring it back to the organization. Share that learning with the rest of the team. The third pillar I want to talk about is community, and this is such an important one because I think there's such misconception here. When we say create communities, you know, I think a lot of organizations tend to just say, well, yeah, we go out, we hang out. Well, these days, you know, virtually, you know, and it's not about that. I mean, that alone does not create a sense of community. Okay, hanging out on house party is not creating community. Yeah, that's socialization, that's part of it. But how you create a tribe, which is really what you're trying to do, and one of the ways to do that is storytelling. And I think we default into telling all the positive stories, the triumph stories, etc. And Stanford's done some very interesting research around this to say actually what creates a sense of belongingness is not stories of triumph, it's actually stories of failure. Okay, being able to share these failures with each other creates a very vulnerable and transparent relationship. That's what creates belongingness, and it creates trust, high trust experiences. And so I want to talk about Fannie Mae. And Fannie Mae, like many other organizations, are undergoing their digital transformation journey, and they too have had to suddenly procure and turn lights on a number of brand new tools. And one of the new rituals that they've done is actually created what's called Friday Failures. And so every Friday, you know, leadership gets around the table and they're sharing stories, or virtual table, I should say, and they're sharing stories of failure, things that didn't go right. And why I love that ritual is that now you're talking about incenting progress versus incenting perfection. Okay, as we talk about, we all want to be innovative organizations, but ask yourself, do we really incent risk-taking? Do we really incent the right behaviors, or do we incent the right outcomes? And so I think we need to flip that. And especially with this generation that constantly wants to do better, they constantly want to be part of a community, we need to find ways to really inspire the right risk-taking if we are going to think differently. and achieve new outcomes. And the last piece I want to talk about is environment. And I think that that's really probably one of the trickiest ones today, because we're all a branch of one, right? And I want to back into this one with a story of a group of performance psychologists led by Tony Schwartz. And they have a really fascinating job, which is, how do I make great athletes better? And so they started with professional tennis players, and they studied, they went through hundreds of hours of footage of these pro players to understand what makes these great players the best. And when they studied that footage, what was frustrating is they actually couldn't tell a significant difference in terms of competitive habits during match points. It wasn't until they started to look at what these athletes were doing in between match points, which actually led to a very fascinating discovery. And so the top tennis athletes had a very consistent set of routines, the way that they walked back to the baseline, the way that they held their head on their shoulders, their breathing techniques, the way they held their gaze. What they actually did unintentionally was create these recovery routines that had maximum recovery in very short periods of time. And so within 15 to 20 seconds, they could actually reduce their heart rate by about 20 beats per minute. Okay, that is what really was the core differentiator, which set these top performing athletes apart from the lower ranked competitors. And so I want to ask you, when was the last time you talked about restorative breaks with your team? And if you're being honest, many of you are going to say, what are you talking about? We've never done that, right? We need to think about that, because what we are doing these days is we are on back-to-back video calls constantly. And let me explain what happens to our brain when we are on these constant back-to-back video calls. 30 minutes in, take a look at this graph here, our gamma waves and our beta waves, we're peaking at that 30-minute mark. And this is from some research from the Microsoft Human Factor Labs, which studies how humans and technology interact. And so we hit fatigue at 30 minutes, and let me explain why. When we are on a video call, we need to concentrate that much more on understanding all of the verbal and nonverbal cues that we are sending and receiving. And so what it does is it requires us to have a sustained level of concentration in these meetings. So what we've learned is that video meetings are more stressful than in-person meetings. And so that's a very important insight, because you get into a couple hours into your day and you're feeling exhausted. It's not perception, it's reality. This is what's happening biologically to us, is that we're feeling exhausted. And so we need to think about how we take restorative breaks. We need to embed that within the environment that we're creating for our teams, for our millennial employees, for our non-millennial employees. And so everybody's different, right? But science gives us 4 principles that we can follow to take very effective restorative breaks. And the first one is short breaks. Some breaks are better than nothing. The power of short breaks. There was a company called Desktime that studies productivity, and they looked at the top 10% of their users, and what do they have in common is they take consistent breaks. And so I'll ask you, when you've been working on a task for, let's say, a couple hours, what ends up happening? You end up getting lost in the task. You actually forget why you're even doing this task in the first place. And that concept's called habituation. So short breaks, a 5-minute break every hour, is a very practical way to kind of refresh your mind. We know that motion, so is motion's better than being stationary. Getting up infuses more creativity. It helps us energize our mind. Social is another aspect. Being able to take breaks with somebody, taking a walk with somebody, socially distanced, of course, or if you're on the phone with somebody talking about something that's unrelated to work, can really help amplify the effects of these short breaks. And that actually leads me to that 4th pillar, which is fully detaching. And so how we usually take breaks is we'll take our phone with us and we walk away, and then we're doing emails. And so we actually just traded one cognitively demanding task for another cognitively demanding task. If we are going to be effective at breaks, we need to physically and psychologically detach from our breaks or from our work if we're going to take effective breaks. I think another thing that you can talk about your team or talk to your team with is how you create virtual commutes. I think we save about an hour of commute each day, which is great. We get more time, right? But here's the thing that we lost by losing our commute is that transition in and out of work mode. And that is the reason why we're seeing a lot of mental health issues surface now, is that we are not able to transition from work to personal very well. Talk to your team about doing a 15-minute virtual commute into work and out of work to help them maintain that balance. It's extremely important. I think the other thing we need to think about is how we level that playing field. I think that as we have, we return to work and we've got some in office, we've got some working remotely, we need to figure out how we level the playing field. And it's very easy to create, a second-class citizen scenario where, think about pre-COVID and we're all in a boardroom. We've got some that are logged in remotely. You got a bad conferencing solution. You don't have a shared screen. That person on that phone's lost, right? That, I think, are very easy ways to create second-class citizen scenarios. So we need to figure out a way of how do we create a level playing field where both people in office and those working from home can engage. And so one of the things that you're going to have to combat is how we change perception, because this grass is greener mentality is going to be very real. Those in office look at those working from home saying, well, they've got it best, they got the ultimate flexibility. Those working from home would look at those in office and saying, well, they get all the attention, they know what's going on, they're plugged in. So you need to find ways of how do you level that playing field. And perception, is extremely important. Perception of being fair is even more important than actually being fair in this case. We need to make sure that we are creating the right perception, the right realities in our organizations. And so we need to figure out how we recreate our team flow. I think before, when everybody was in office, it was a heck of a lot easier to stay connected. You bump into them at the cafeteria or grabbing a coffee and whatnot. Everybody feels that they're in the same boat. Now we're all isolated. We're branches of one, and so we need to recreate that team flow. And that starts with how we're checking in with our team. And so one of the practices that we do is we do a daily stand-up, and we use Agile Poly as a tool. And every morning, people on the team get a ping that asks them 3 questions, which is, what are your top priorities for today? What's your bandwidth? And do you need help? And what this practice does is it actually allows you to reflect and think about what are the top priorities that I have today that I need to get done. The second thing is it builds accountability. It builds a culture of accountability where you don't want to be that person that's posting the same stuff every single day, right? When everybody has visibility across the team to workloads, behavior changes. And so as a manager and as a leader, we need to think about how do we walk not just the physical floor, but how do we walk the virtual floor, staying in touch with people. And I think one of the things we need to get around is stop having to think about every virtual interaction has to be scheduled. It can be spontaneous. You can just call somebody. What's the difference between that and walking over to somebody's desk? And if they're not there, they're not there. Well, if they're not there at their desk or at home, they're just not going to answer the call. Being able to have some of those spontaneous interactions, I think, is extremely important to see what's going on in your team, but also be seen, right? So I think that those are important. And I'll ground this as we've been talking about culture. What is the role of culture within digital transformation, right? We've talked about how profound it can be. We've talked about the risks of digital transformation. I want to ask you, what % of digital transformation initiatives do you think are succeeding today? I want you to say it out loud. What do you think? What percent? It's 9%. 91% of change initiatives are failing, and this is based on a Harvard Business Review study. And when I pose this question to you, what are the factors that's driving, change failure? What do you think? What do you think those factors are? Let me tell you, these are the top factors that's driving change failure: communication, understanding why we're changing, leadership support, lack of user buy-in. What do all of these things have in common? None of them are technology problems. They are all people factors. And that's the miss that we're having in this digital transformation era, is we are ignoring the human factor. If we want to get digital transformation right, we need to get the human factors right. And so as you think about going forward, AI, as powerful as a technology as it is, will not transform your business. Technology has become ubiquitous. We all have access to the same technology, okay? There's commoditization to a certain extent. What is different is your people. If you want to drive change in your organization, let's get culturally intelligent. Culturally intelligent with how we engage our employees. How do we create rich employee experiences that drive or form the right values, that inspire the right behaviors, that drive the right outcomes? Let's get culturally intelligent together. And we're going to have a panel that's coming up where we can unpack this. We've got some very talented INROADS ambassadors, which we're going to be exploring and having and continuing this conversation. Stay tuned.
Joining Andrew R. in conversation are several INROADS ambassadors, including Tazeen Hossein, Daja Jennings, Julimar Koloin Montanez, Michael Linton, and Markindi Fiame.
Welcome back for part two. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got a very exciting panel planned here. We've got some very talented INROADS ambassadors, and they're going to shed light on how do we become more culturally intelligent together. So first question that I wanted to throw to the panel is I talked about this millennial hierarchy of needs, right? We saw that values at the top of the pyramid, and that being, one of the most important things to, millennial talent when they look for, okay, well, who's the right employer for me? So maybe, Tazeen, I can throw it to you first. Maybe first tell us a little bit about you, and then help us understand what are the values that you look for in an employer, and maybe conversely, what are the values that you stay away from? So, Tazeen, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Tazeen Hossein. I was an enroller for 3 summers when I was in college as a mechanical engineering student at Georgia Tech. I graduated in 2017, and I remember when I was interviewing for full-time positions around graduation, I used to always ask the interviewers a couple of the same questions to make sure that their values would align with mine. And I would always ask about what their diversity and inclusion initiatives were. Because I knew that if they were to give me a canned response, or if the hiring manager didn't know how to answer, then I wasn't really sure if they knew what they were talking about, or if they even had in practices that were a priority. I used to always ask about corporate social responsibility. Even in INROADS, it's instilled in us that we give back, right? And I think for us, that's an important value that we want to see reciprocated in our employers. So if a company doesn't offer opportunities to volunteer, if they can't show how they're contributing as an organization or as a corporation to the communities that they are involved in, then I'm not sure that would be a company that I would want to be a part of as well. And then lastly, I have a really high value in personal growth within a company. If I'm going to invest my time in this company, will my employer also invest time in me? Will there be learning opportunities? Do they expect me to be in the same role for 5 years? Because most of the time, I don't think I do, right? So if we're aligned on those and I have those opportunities open, then it's a lot more of an employer that I would want to work for. Conversely, I think industries that expect you to work without any work-life balance, but without actually saying it, going into that type of environment where it's really, really cutthroat. Yeah, I don't think I would. Yeah.
Tazeen, I love the comment you made around canned responses, because I think that as a general statement, what we see a lot of is these kind of canned responses. Hey, here's our inclusion and diversity policy. Well, how are you walking the walk, right? Do you mean it? So I think that's a great point, is let's check what is our policies, what are our programs that we're offering, and let's make sure that they aren't canned, that they truly resemble the values of the company. Michael, why don't I pass it over to you? Why don't you tell us a little bit about you, and again, what are the values that you look for in a top employer?
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. So a little bit about myself. My name is Michael Linton. I'm a Colombian American studying at Cornell University, and I'm also an Army ROTC cadet. So I have a little interesting twist to all this. And for me, three values that really stand out is one, inclusiveness, two, empathy, and three, energy. And these all tie together because first off, if I'm going to be there, I want to feel like I'm part of the team, that aspect of inclusiveness.
Yep.
The second aspect is empathy. The employer really needs to understand and like put themselves in the shoe of the employee of where do they want to go. We as millennials, we want to be challenged, but employers have to see how do they want to be challenged. Just giving them 80 hours of work a week might not be challenging them in the way that they desire and they could really contribute to the team. And then finally, that energy is what ties it all together. Because if these employers are doing it reluctantly or without that passion to like be in a team, it just kind of seems like you're almost like a burden, like, oh, they're doing this because they have to. And that energy is really what ties it all together and kind of inspires me as an individual to, one, feel an ownership as part of that team, and two, always want to be contributing to the team based off of my personal growth.
Michael, it's a great point. When you talk about empathy, where we typically hear empathy is around customer experience. How do we show empathy to our customers? How do we personalize the experiences? But when do we ever talk about employee experience, right? Or being employee-centric instead of only customer-centric? How can we be customer-centric and employee-centric? Julie Mar, why don't I throw it over to you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and talk to us about values.
Thank you, Andrew. First of all, my name is Julie Marcolom. I am a junior majoring in mechanical engineering at the Polytechnic University in Puerto Rico. Last summer, I have a virtual internship with L3Harris, where I was supporting the manufacturing area of the Space Underboard Systems, and now I'm working with Medtronic Puerto Rico, supporting a new project of medical device. Well, for me, I want an employer who has a sense of commitment and is willing to teach. Commitment for me is an essential ingredient, and I need to know that my employer and I are on the same page with the same values. Also, commitment requires creating long-term goals and then devising a vision and direction to achieve those goals. And I think that if a company develops a sense of commitment in their employees, they will be more productive and motivated to achieve the mission that the company has. And also, no one is good on everything. And I know that I'm not good in everything, but I want to grow as an employee and as a person. If the leaders of the companies are willing to teach their employees, they will have employees prepared, capable, and skilled to fulfill the mission.
Julie Mar, you touched on a lot of really big points. I think the point on betterment, right? Second pillar in that pyramid, I think is such an important one. And you're right. I think it's what are the learning paths that we're investing in and how are they personalized to each individual employee? It's such an important topic these days. Markendi, why don't I throw it over to you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what are the top values that you look for in an employer?
Yes, thank you, Andrew. My name is Mark Henny. I'm originally from Haiti. I've been with INROADS I've been with INROADS throughout college at Suffolk University and been interning at Deloitte. Now full-time analyst advisory at Deloitte. For me, I feel like it's very important for a company to have integrity, to lead by example. I feel like that's one of the main factors clients look for when they're looking to partner with different companies. But not only that, but to piggyback on Michael's point is when companies are focusing on clients, but not only on clients, but they need to focus back on their employees as well, reinvest in their employees. So when the employee feel like they are being valued, they could feel like, okay, we can add more to the table and work together to get the motion and mission moving right along.
Yeah, great point, Markendi. Deja, do you want to join in here? What values you look for? What are the top values?
Awesome. University. So glad and so honored just to be on this panel and a part of INROADS. I must say, values that I look for a company, I think I'm going to sum everything up what everyone else said. But character, integrity, and synergy. I'm really big on character and integrity. If I know that a company actually talks what they talk, but actually walk it out, not just talk the talk, but walk out what they say, I am 100% down to be a part. Not only that, but character, synergy. I really believe that joining a company, I want to be a part of an environment that really, wants me to thrive in and wants me to share all of my insight abilities to push the company. And I believe that's one of the things that I look for values-wise in a company.
Amazing. Great way to take us to the next question here, which is, they say that nobody leaves an organization, they leave their manager, which I think is so true in many different ways. So I want you to share with everybody on the call, to those line of business leaders, and senior managers and directors and VPs, talk to us about what are the mental shifts and behavioral shifts, or let's call them optimizations, that you think can be made to help retain you, to retain your interest, your morale, your motivation. Markendi, why don't I throw it over to you? Talk to us about that. What are some of the shifts that you would love to see that would make you want to stay at an employer?
Yes, of course. Thank you for that question, Andrew. To break this question into three parts, I feel like it is important that when a manager or a leader is working with a team, it is important for them to put themselves in the other person's shoe. Especially in a time like this in COVID-19, who would have known we would be working remote all this time?
Yeah.
And just with all the life challenges that come in, it is important that, we can be flexible to make sure we're understanding and also know what the other person is going through. But another aspect to that is communication. We might be going back to calls, like just like you mentioned in your video, being on calls 24/7, or just like back-to-back calls and meetings all day. But sometimes when you're focused on the call too much and you're not trying to get a job done, it is kind of hard to communicate every little aspect, especially when you're not right next to that person on the desk where you can ask them a cool question. So I feel like it's important for them to have different perspectives and just be adjusting to change within this new environment, but also understanding where the other person is coming from so they could, bring back that employee instead of having them leave to go to another company.
Mark Henny, it's a great point because as we think about what COVID-19 has done and brought on new, more complex challenges, I think there's got to be this openness to a beginner's mindset, right? And I talk about owner's mindset, but a beginner's mindset is also very important because to a beginner, there's so many different possibilities. You have that opportunity to rethink things versus when we fall into this expert channel, we tend to look at things down these very tunnel vision channels, these very narrow channels based on our experiences. So it's a great point.
I just wanted to know,
go for it. Yeah.
Right on what you said, sorry. As a leader or a manager, most of the time you're focusing on how to lead and what's next. But sometimes as a leader, you need to step back, also think about how can I help my team lead as well. So that way they have one leg within that.
Yeah, excellent point. Deja, why don't I kick it over to you? What do you think? What's the mental shifts, behavioral shifts? What would you like to see in workplace in general?
Got it. So honestly, what I would share is one thing as a leader that will kind of retain individuals to stay, honestly, is as a leader, knowing each other's temperament. I'm really big on, seeing, right? Like, having your ears open, having your eyes open to know, the people that you work with. If you know the people that you work with, then 9 out of 10, it will be good. 9 out of 10, they'll stay. I have a personal story. When I was intern at UPS corporate, my manager, he was really good with knowing everybody's skills and abilities. Like if you know individuals, their skills and abilities, then you'll just keep individuals staying because you know that, hey, if I give them something, I know that they'll thrive in that. So as a leader, I really believe like going straight into knowing everybody's temperament, behavioral signs, skills, and abilities, so everyone can just thrive in their own lane.
Yeah, I love it. Personalization, such an important topic, both in the customer world, but also in the employee world. Julie Mar, why don't I throw it over to you? What are the mental behavioral shifts that you would love to see or you think we can improve on?
Well, for me, as a millennial, I like to feel productive and I like to do things that matter. I need challenge, but I also want to be happy and motivated in my workplace. Right now, I work with Medtronic in Puerto Rico, and one thing that I like about my workplace is that everyone works happy and motivated. If someone does a great job, our boss congratulates them in person or on LinkedIn, for example. One time I saw a publication that say you are an important piece to this company, kudos to you. And that really motivates an employee and make you feel good and useful for the company. So two things for me, employee needs motivation and challenge.
Yeah, I love the point around praise and just those things matter, right? We talk about frequency of feedback, so it's a great point. Michael, why don't I kick it over to you? Talk to us about shifts, mental shifts, behavioral shifts. What do we need to do better?
Thank you. So I got to tie it back to my values. I think really it takes, first off, empathy. So, you know, a manager can listen all they want, but actively listening, conscientiously putting themselves in the shoes of the speaker, that's important to actually understanding what they desire. And then to build on that, you have to understand, based off what they're telling you, how can I make them feel included on the team? And you have to have that energy of, you know, I'm on my own path, but you're on the path with me. So while we might have a split at some point in the road, we're both going to go at it with energy, with passion. And that's how you can really inspire the people you're working with.
Amazing. Amazing. And again, for all those, all the millennial stereotypes that tend to flood, I mean, just listen to the conversation and the passion that's here. It's how do we channel that? Tazeen, talk to us on this. What are some of the changes that we can make? What optimizations can we make?
Yeah, no, I agree with Michael. Employee engagement is so huge, and it all goes back to motivation, right? I think when someone or when leadership or management pushes a bottom line on us, and that, you know, meeting the bottom line is our motivation, all of a sudden you have this really stagnant environment. And if the rest of my colleagues aren't engaged, then I'm not engaged. And like Julie Mar said, I would want my contributions and my work to also be valuable and to be meaningful, not just to me, but to the team as a whole. But also at the same time, on the flip side, when we're talking about motivation, I think coming from a manager directly, and I think my current manager does this really well, is that sometimes it's not so much about the project or the product, but it's about the development of you as an individual. Because I think what we want is we want to come into somewhere and know that our manager will teach us and they'll coach us in what we're doing today, but they also have enough insight and perspective to be able to willing to shape you into what you need to be in the future. And I think the worst thing a company can do is pigeonhole us from the get-go and hire us to replace someone who's retired and mold us to be that specialist instead of seeing where we could end up. And I think that might be the biggest mind shift. We talk about how when we were INROADS interns, right, we are taught really, really well on how to adapt and join new companies and fit to that mold. But I think this mind shift of having a company shift and adapt to us would make all of the difference, right? All of a sudden, we're meeting in the middle and we're understanding that if we are to be able to operate in excellence and give our best to the company, then maybe we also need to be able to meet our needs by finding different paths and not trying to fit us into the current mold that already exists.
Tazeen, I connect with that on many levels. I think we need to remind ourselves, are we trying to fill a position or are we trying to develop future leaders for our organization to drive innovation, right? Two very different mindsets. Okay, one thing I want to bring up, and I mean, like I said, I feel like we could talk for hours. I mentioned that AI will not transform your business, right? In every executive meeting I'm in, it's how are we using AI, right? And I bring up the point about cultural intelligence. And so how can we be more culturally intelligent? What does that mean to you? And how can we be more culturally intelligent in the workplace? Maybe Deja, I'll kick it over to you. You want to start us off on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe that culture is very vital and it's very key. Like it's very important. Having the right culture keeps people going. Having the right culture keeps people driving an hour to get to work. Having the right culture keeps people going, clicking on Zoom calls with a smile and just ready to share information and knowledge. So I truly believe, something, that changes from AI to culture is really just having that right sense. Like when I think of, Coke, you know what I'm saying? Coke, the company, literally is amazing. On social media, it's like, wow, I want to be a part of Coke. Like, I want to have a picture with the Coke bottle. Okay.
Yeah.
So like, what the company perceives to other people is very, very key and very vital. And what I would share is really just being intentional. If you want to change, your culture at a company, be intentional of what you do. Increase the diversity and inclusion. Celebrate people. Acknowledge people, even on the small wins. Like the small things leads up to big rewards, right? Not only that, but celebrate people. The Asian American Month, Black History Month, Native American Month. These things help increase culture. One thing about UPS, we have what we call BRGs, and that's like a business resource group. And honestly, although UPS is a really big company, I feel like, I'm connected because I'm like, oh my gosh, I have people that I can network with, I can connect with. And I can really see companies being intentional because culture is everything. It keeps people going. It keeps people coming to work. Because listen, my internship, I literally had an hour to drive. But I was super excited because I'm like, you know what? I love this company. How can I be a help? So
Deja, it sounds like purpose drove you, not the paycheck, Like it's more powerful than the paycheck.
That's it.
Michael, why don't I kick it over to you? What does cultural intelligence mean to you? How do we drive that higher, let's call it CI, cultural intelligence within our workplace? What do you think?
Perfect. So I think we gotta take a new approach to kind of how we're doing this, because I think the culture is the people. That's important. And so the thing that I've seen in a lot of companies, which is good, these diversity and inclusion efforts, but it's almost like we're getting there and they're already dividing us into these groups. What I think is it's important that somehow we tie this all together. Yes, we might be different. Yes, we have these groups where we can feel comfortable with because they're similar to us, but let's not be separated. Let's bring it all together. Let's hit that home run and realize that we all got these differences. We all are part of different groups, but together we make one great team. And for me, I think reapproaching how we address diversity and inclusion is really important to improving the culture in the workplace.
Michael, you hit on a big point, which is, we hear this a lot, is how do we break down silos? Mostly in the technology space, but breaking down cultural silos. That's a really fascinating point. I think we should think about that. Julie Mar, why don't we come to you? What do you think? Cultural intelligence, how do we become more culturally intelligent together?
For me, cultural intelligence is a key part of the development of a company. But sometimes we say a lot and do little, and that does not generate cultural intelligence. So if you as a company say that you care about the environment, well, go do something for the environment. If you say that Black Lives Matter, well, do something for that. The words need to know that this company is doing something for society and not only for themselves. And in the millennial hierarchy of needs of Andrew, values were on the top. And for most of us millennials, values are important. So when the companies are doing something that represent, at least for me, that this company has values. And with that, I think the company will grow and millennials will want to work there.
Great point. Great point. Dazine, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I agree. That reminded me of what I was saying about how when students or when we're looking at different companies, we tend to look at leadership in that company already at different levels, right? And we look to see the type of people who are there. And if there's no one that looks like us, we take a second chance. But if that company in this day and age in 2020 has a homogenous leadership board, but is transparent to the public about how they are working to improve that, about how they're actively trying to engage their workforce, that means a lot. But we as millennials, we do a lot of internet research, right? So we can tell when a company puts something out as fluff on the internet. So you're right. If they're going to say that they're going to do something, they should do something, and they should be able to be transparent enough to prove it. And I think PepsiCo, I remember in June, July over the summer when everything kind of peaked, Pepsi had a really, really great statement out in which the CEO put out multiple different action points and had metrics. And I think seeing something like that is so encouraging. It made me want to work for a company like Pepsi that took this so seriously that they're willing to engage their employees to keep us active and to value us the way that we want to be valued.
Great point. We got to walk the walk, right? Every statement, every program that we release, and that we don't do something, it's a significant reputational risk. Mark Hendy, what do you think? How do we get more culturally intelligent?
Yes, of course. I think everybody had a great point. For me, it goes back to education. Just having a broad of understanding of what other people have to offer, but also their values. When you can put that all together and come together, then that's how you come and move as one. And taking action is the second one, because a lot of times when you see companies do put out statements to making a change, that change is still pending and then pending. So how often are we going to wait, and how long are we going to wait? But it is important that we see those changes happen in front of our eyes. Sometimes it might take a couple months, but however, we want to see that change moving forward. And us as millennials, we are smart, and everybody around us are smart as well. We are the ones that created AI and artificial intelligence, but with CI, cultural intelligence, we could make something even greater than AI. So it's all about taking all those aspects, putting them together, and moving forward with that.
Yeah, and Mark Hendy, make a great point, is we construct these algorithms. How do we ensure that we aren't including our own bias, right, within that and scaling that? I know we just got a few more minutes left, and like I said, I feel like we can talk for hours on this, but there was a question around how do we work better in a virtual environment? Do you have any tips? Does anyone want to share any fast tips, though, because we only got a couple minutes left? So if I'll open that up. How do we work better virtually?
I'll take it, and I think one of these buzzwords that I keep saying is empathy. It's really about active listening, putting yourself in the shoes of who's speaking, and understanding, hey, maybe the reason their camera is off is because they have a situation at home. Whatever it may be understanding, see how you as a leader can adapt and create a better situation for that speaker where they can produce even more as an individual. So keyword, empathy, active listening.
Love it. We got empathy. Do we have time for one more? Or maybe two. Any thoughts? How do we work better as a team virtually?
Bringing positive energy. Always, because when you have a positive energy, it will match somebody else's energy and lead on throughout the whole group. So I feel like vibes do matter. Also making sure that, you bring in that making sure that everybody is like feeling well and doing well throughout like the whole call.
Absolutely.
I agree. And keeping tabs on your team, even if you are virtual, right? Have those team calls, no matter how big or small, no matter if everyone's working on something different. If everyone's touching base, then we could be in different states, but we're still on the same team,
Yeah.
You know, the one, sorry, was there anything else? I feel like Deja, you want to say something?
No, I'm over here like, right, you're right, absolutely. No, but what I was gonna share is when she said, you know, keeping tabs, like going just out the way just to check on somebody. And it brings back to empathy. So everything that you guys are saying is just correct. I love it. Yes.
It's fantastic. Like I said, I mean, look, thank you so much for taking part in the panel today. I mean, and to the INROADS ambassadors, you represent the top talent and organizations. Everybody here is trying to understand, how do we motivate you? How do we drive that morale? So thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. Some great dialogue on the chat as well. And hopefully everyone can stick around for a little bit and maybe interact with some of those on the line with us. So with that said, thank you so much for joining us.